This is one of the most obscure books I have, and I loved it. It was one of the most profound reading experiences I've had in many years, actually, probably since reading the Strugatsky Brothers' Roadside Picnic. Anyway, this is Porphyry's On Principles and Matter, a translation of a Syriac translation. I didn't even know what that was until reading this. And I will present to you the general content of the book, but more crucially, I will also tell you in this video why it moved me so much. I guarantee you it's not what you think. Okay. So why did I get this? Well, there's a couple of reasons. First, as you might know, certainly if you watched a few other videos from this channel, I decided after quite a few years of dabbling to become a true philosophical adept, if you like. Last year, I decided that I would become a philosopher on top of everything else that I do. And so I built a corpus, a philosophical corpus of a great many books. And I'm currently reading them. So I'm a little behind schedule, but still I'm making progress. And so topic, in other videos I will explain more. But anyway, I have read so far all of Plato, all of Aristotle, about a third of, what's his name, Plotinus, the pre-Socratics, a lot of stuff. I also read more recent stuff, but the idea is that I'm going chronologically. And in the process of doing all that, well, when I made my list, the idea is that I tried to pick the least, like the lowest possible number of books, right? I wanted to read Heidegger's Being and Time and Marx's Capital with as much baggage as I could to better help me really understand the full depth of these works. But at the same time, I wanted to read as few books as possible, right? Because I want to get there eventually. So right now it's a 4-year plan, 4-year mission, likely shipping up to be more like 5 years. Anyway, so I had included no Porphyry in the list. I didn't even know who he was. And now I do. And what happened is that as I was reading more and more, I discovered that I was really becoming interested in the various topics that Plato, Aristotle, and all the others were talking about. And so I ended up adding more and more lesser-known books. So, and eventually I added Porphyry, who is mostly known as the editor of Plotinus's Enneads. In fact, the reason why it's called the Enneads, which is a series of 6 volumes, which are a collation of 9 essays each, purportedly, so 6 times 9, Ennead, so 9. The reason it's structured like that is because Porphyry made that up. Okay, so he had the writings of Porphyry, who he had asked to write down his teachings, essentially, who was a disciple of Porphyry, and of Plotinus. And dear master, please write your teachings, which he did, but Porphyry decided that it would make sense to subdivide it into essays, whatever. He cut it up. He did an editing job for his own reasons. He was sincere, but he more or less made it up. He changed the order. He cut a few of them in 2 or 3 pieces, at least 2. in certain cases, so that he would have enough essays to have 6 volumes of 9 essays. Anyway, Porphyry. But back in the day, he was also very well known as the author of the Isagoge. I don't think I'm making this up, which I have read, which is really massively interesting, which I strongly encourage you to read, especially since it's a quick read, and which is just a very good, easy to read summary of mainly Aristotle's teachings. Going from memory, these are all books I've read. I think I've all read them only once each so far. Again, as I've said in other videos, reading them once is never enough. Okay, so we're learning philosophy here. We're not pretending we're full-fledged masters. Okay, we're autodidacts on a learning journey. But still, I don't think I'm making this up. It's mainly Aristotle's teachings, and Aristotle, I really fell in love with him. But truth be told, certainly in the beginning, he's very hard to read for various reasons. He's well known for that, and even when you get used to the style of his writing, it's still kind of rough going. Though I did develop a taste for it. But anyway, so Porphyry is when you read his own works, they're a lot easier to understand. They're better written, better structured, and the Isagoge back in the day, he was very well known as a good stepping stone. Like you would read him first as a sort of tutorial on Aristotelian, philosophy and method. The general idea is that. So I was adding more and more titles on my list, and as one does, I like books, so I like shopping for books and buying books. I have that vice. And I was shopping on Amazon, which is evil, as we all know. It is truly evil. But they have these dirt cheap books. I mean, I feel like I'm driving the train to Auschwitz sometimes. I mean, obviously it's a terrible comparison, but in real life, I mean, the working conditions of these people. The drivers, they come to your place, and the people in the plants, the Amazon, warehouses, they are living hell on earth. They are beyond exploited. Like it's true horror. I feel guilty doing it, but they have these incredible deals. So there's a true reflection of the horror of our times there. Okay, and I got this. And this is probably $60 when it's brand new at full price. I got this new, but like 95% off, right? Which is what Amazon is famous for, those sorts of deals. That in Prime, and I got it because the bug bit me, and I got it, and I received it, and I read it. And the book is mostly made up of 2 parts. The second part is Porphyry's treatise on, it's called On Principles and Matter. I'll briefly explain what that means a bit later on. And that second part, it is a bilingual edition, which are always super fun, like great, super cool, and are often a sign of a good translation. Like even if you don't understand the original in any way, shape, or form, it's a good sign when you have the original language. This is Syriac. Again, I didn't even know this alphabet existed before opening this book. And the idea here is that Porphyry wrote this in Greek, presumably, but the original Greek is lost. But there was for a while, a group of Syriacs. So I think they're from Syria, hence the name. Might be wrong on this, but this is described in the introduction, but I didn't take notes on that, and it's been a couple of weeks since I read it. But anyway, there was this group of Syriac scholars, philosophers, who diligently translated and studied these works by the great philosophers of antiquity. And we know, of course, that eventually many of these works, notably Aristotle, but Plotinus and Plato, lots of these works were saved by Islamic philosophers, which is true and which is a great thing that they certainly did do, for which we should be grateful. But before them, there were the Syriacs. They actually came before, if I understood correctly, and these books are rarely talked about and translated, and very few people speak Syriac or even know that these people exist or did exist. So it's pretty obscure. And this is the second part of the book. Again, I will briefly expound on the topic, the doctrine that Porphyry puts forth here, but generally speaking. But the first part of the book is a very deep study of the text and its author. We're not quite sure that Porphyry wrote this. This is pretty frequent for texts from antiquity. So the person who wrote the study and who translated this treaty is called Yury Arzhanov. And so he does what you find in books like this, like scholarly works, in philosophy and literature. So he explains the context of the work. He explains what the Syriac were doing, who they were. He explains like Porphyry and his intellectual heritage, if you like, because he was a disciple of Plotinus, but also of somebody else, I forget, but another famous philosopher, and so forth and so forth. And what really touched me, kind of spoiling it, I'll just give you a hint, it was actually in the first part, which I will finish this video with. But generally speaking, what is Porphyry's treatise on principles and matter? Well, the general idea is that, this is extremely geeky stuff. So he's going on about questions that come up if you read a lot of Aristotle. Okay, so principles, from what I understand, again, I read a lot of it, but I did read it only once, and the idea is that I'm still at the, the Adler term for the first read-through. Like I'm doing a general, relatively superficial read-through. I also consider philosophy as a second language, essentially. So I'm absorbing a lot of input to familiarize myself with the general language, the concepts, the way of thinking. And that certainly works. I've observed a significant difference compared to where I was last year on all that stuff. But still, I'm not presenting myself at this stage as any master of the doctrines. I might get some of the details wrong, but the general idea is that, okay, so we have logic, obviously, starting with mostly Aristotle. We can say that he's essentially the guy who invents what we think of as logic, at least pre-mathematical logic, though he takes a lot, I think, from, what's his name, Euclid. Anyway, that doesn't really matter. So logic, you're combining two things. And thing one, and if thing one and thing two, then thing three, right? And you're trying to define what things are, and the idea is you have the thing and its quality. So again, essentially thing one and thing two, like A and B makes the C, makes the observable phenomenon, whatever. But the general idea is that certainly, before two, there is one. Okay, so there are a certain number of properties, if you like, that are irreducible to the subdivision of their components. Like there are things, not things in themselves, but they are principles, okay? They are the original thing. So maybe time is one, okay, generally speaking. Again, the details are wrong, but the general idea is something like that. And here it's super interesting if you've read Aristotle, because the general question is, okay, what are principles? How do we find out if a thing is a principle or not? Do they exist? And what about matter? Like, is it a principle? And what is actually matter? And obviously, Porphyry being a disciple of Plotinus, so a Neoplatonician, well, Plotinus, the whole question of the forms, like the ideas, is central to the entire discussion. So the idea is that you would have matter, okay, but it's just this protoplasmic blob, and it's made obviously of the elements, fire and water and air and earth. But matter is the substrate, if you like. It's like the alchemical salt. So it's just the basic goo and the spiritual, intelligible, otherworldly, true essence of the book, or the thing in itself. Comes down from the intelligible realm and populates the matter and gives it form, so it becomes like the book as individual object. Okay. So this is like the general idea as I understand it so far. Okay. Again, the general idea is probably something like that. I definitely plan to reread all of this. Don't quote me in your doctoral dissertation. I mean, you can, but I suggest you get another source on the details. However, okay, I did find this massively interesting. There's also the index. Anyway, it's just a fantastic piece of work. And in terms of the content itself, as a guy who loves Aristotle and who finds his way of structuring and organizing his reflections very appealing, really calls to me. Well, I liked all that, and interesting questions. It's super interesting, but it's super niche, like it's massively geeky, okay? It's relevant to the entirety, I think, of like foundational Western civilization, if you like. I mean, it's relevant if you're diving deeper. I think you should definitely read this. You'll get something out of it. But it's still niche and obscure, okay? However, what moved me so... okay. It's the last page of the introduction by Mr. Arzhanov. So essentially, he's talking about the conclusion. I will read. I will quote profusely, though succinctly, from that conclusion. There's not that much to it. So he says. So Mr. Yury Arzhanov says the Syriac text published in the present book has had a long transmission history before it came to light at the beginning of the 21st century. So first of all, part of what is so moving here, it all combines at the end, but is that this book, like this Principles and Matter treatise on Principles and Matter, it was more or less lost, okay, virtually unknown, maybe except for Syriac scholars, but it was essentially impossible to read it until the beginning of the 21st century, so like 25 years ago. So we're kind of like in Dead Sea Scrolls territory, or when they found the Gospel according to St. Thomas. Like these are even like a bit older, somewhere in the 20th century, but it's still the general idea that these texts were thought lost, or they had completely vanished from the consciousness of world civilization for 1,000 years or more, like 1,500 years. And now we're just rediscovering them. It's kind of like discovering a lost city in those Tarzan books. Anyway, and he gives, Mr. Arzhanov, he gives the history of this text. So end of the 2nd century, etc., like BC and blah, blah, blah. And so century by century, 781, 782, the East Syrian Catholicos, Timothy, the first described the contents of the Syriac version of the treaty. So there's some trace, in the documentation somewhere that this exists. Okay, this is like if, I play Call of Cthulhu, and when you're looking for an obscure copy of the Necronomicon, it's stuff like that. Okay, so geeky stuff. And it continues, like, circa 1975, or then, it skips 1266. And eventually it moves to 2014, and where he says a detailed description of manuscript DS-27 and its contents appeared in the catalogue of S. Brock and L. Van Rompuy. And then I'll just continue reading, because we're getting at the true topic of this video here. So from here now it's Mr. Arzhanov. I'm directly quoting him. Okay. So he says, thus, the treatise on principles and matter has had a long history of nearly 2,000 years before it may now be published in the present volume. And it seems proper to apply to it the well-known proverb, habent sua fata libelli. Books have their own fate. Well-known proverb with people who write such things, and hopefully eventually who read them. Anyway, continues Mr. Arzhanov. He says, okay, these words, books have their own fate. Books have their own fate. These words derive from a treatise of the 3rd century Roman grammarian Terentianus Maurus, and the full version of the sentence containing them reads, pro captu lectores habent sua fata libelli. Books have their fate depending on the mental capacity of the reader. And he continues, like essentially last paragraph. He says, a similar idea came to mind of an unknown scribe in the monastery Dair al-Suryan, who wrote in the margin of a Syrian codex, "We books are many, but there is no one who reads us. Oh, what a great pity that we remain unused." And so Mr. Arzhanov concludes, it was due to the learned monks of Dair al-Suryan that the Syriac version of Porphyry's work has been preserved until our days and can now be published in the present volume. Hopefully, this plea, written in the margin of an old Syriac codex, which has now reached us from a long historical remove, will be proven false by the readers of this edition. So this is beautiful, but I was profoundly moved and struck by the depth of what was happening here. So first of all, we had a very good philosophy book, a massively interesting work by a lesser known author, Porphyry, but a true philosopher in his own right of merit, who wrote a very interesting and important book, if you're interested in that. Okay, so a lost work of hard-earned human knowledge and wisdom, which crawls, this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time, like the other guy said, like the bard said. So there's that, and then there's the fact that we have this, Syriac scribe, so just a copyist in a monastery, like in Syria, I guess. He's toiling away, like maybe in the middle of the night, like 1,500, 2,000 years ago, copying this work. And even then, he's in this warehouse of scrolls and books, and he's like, nobody reads this. Nobody reads this stuff. And it's full of love and wisdom and knowledge and insight, and people have toiled their entire lives, to give this to the world and to raise ever so slightly our collective level. God knows we need it. So the scribe is lamenting, like no one is reading this treasure trove of wonder, right? And he feels so moved, this anonymous, copyist, scribe, that he writes it in the margin. He writes essentially a 2-line poem. We books are many, but there is no one who reads us. Oh, what a great pity that we remain unused. So he's not even talking about himself. He's voicing, the soul of the books. He's talking about the books, like the muses. Or let them sing, the book. So he writes this down in the margin of this obscure text, which goes forgotten for 2,000 years. Okay? And eventually this guy, Mr. Yury Arzhanov, he learned Syriac, and he gets the gig. He translates this. And he does a superlative, wonderful, wonderful job. Great, fantastic translation, a true work of love and knowledge and devotion. This is a fantastic introduction and translation. But surely he must have realized that no one is going to read this, most likely. When he's saying this, we books are many, no one reads it, he can't help but know that he's also speaking about this thing he's writing, and this lament of the unread, beauty and wonder, of the soul of the world singing out in these forgotten, unread books. And he's like, I wrote, and he's not, he's not blind. He lives in the same world we all do. He's like, I'm sure this cost him so many hours, hundreds, thousands of, who knows how long this took, years of his life, and he does all this, and he reaches the end of this journey, the last page of his conclusion. He's like, why did I do this? I did all these lives of joy in this book, and who's going to read it? And I did, and I thought it was I saw it, and I'm like, I see what you're doing here, Mr. Arzhanov, and I see you, and I see what you did, and it is truly, truly wonderful. You have done a great service to the world by translating this book, and in many more ways than one. So in my name, and in the name of humanity and self-learning philosophers everywhere and forgotten scribes everywhere, I thank you with all my heart. And that is that. I have a Substack, I have a Patreon if you want to encourage my work. I strongly encourage you to find a copy of this and to read it. The entire collection looks super interesting. And until next time, live long and prosper, keep watching the skies. And this is Christian Veltes signing off for today, reminding you to read the damn books. Read the works.